It's driven some of us absolutely crackers. Day after day, I come into work quietly determined not to talk about Trump on air yet again. He might be brilliant at social media and winding people up, but why should we allow him to sit inside our heads like this? Sod off. And then, day after day, he says something so outrageous or dangerous or just funny, and quite often all three at the same time, that it's impossible not to notice. And the Washington ringmaster has caught our attention again. In Kipling's phrase, the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the flame. He isn't only President of the United States, he is a man who is reshaping the world around us. As world leaders gather in Davos for the annual boring Olympics, they are being forced yet again to respond, with President Macron warning against bullies and the Belgian Prime Minister going even further. Being a happy vassal, he said, is one thing. Being a miserable slave is something else. The truth is, ignoring Donald Trump is like setting out in a light shirt pretending the storm isn't there. Let's remind ourselves of just a few moments from the past year.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
I'm not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing
I'm
cards.
serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
The United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir.
Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, it is with great pleasure that my wife and I welcome you to Windsor Castle.
All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military working with U.S. law enforcement successfully captured Maduro. We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not.
Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, in recognition of his exceptional and extraordinary actions to promote peace and unity around the world.
And if you think this is hard for journalists, spare a thought for the politicians. Downing Street carefully draws up its plans to discuss civil service reform, or employment law, or the cost of living. And then, kazam! In comes Trump with the Gaza Board of Peace, or Greenland, or tariffs, and the government is whacked across the head and can barely get a hearing. Michael Gove called the US president Lex Luthor on yesterday's show, and for a full year now, he has had the microphone. And on cue, he's about to grab it back again very soon with a press conference in the White House, which we will bring to you live. But first, let's hear from our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks. He's here to tell us what we can expect. Simon, he's on his way to Davos. What kind of message are you expecting?
Well, I think we can expect the unexpected over the course of the next hour. There's no question about that, Andrew, at all. The scene is set in the briefing room. I think we're still a few minutes away from President Trump arriving. The press corps has not yet been given the 2-minute warning that tells them that, he's on his way. But this is a last-minute decision by President Trump to join the briefing today. It was always a bit of a mystery to me that he wasn't planning to make an appearance on this first anniversary of his return to power. Now he's going to be at the briefing that we were told earlier was simply going to be hosted by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, and he's absolutely going to trumpet what he says has been a year of achievement. According to the White House, he's coming into the briefing room to talk about 365 wins in 365 days. If you want to make an absolutely rock-solid bet, I guarantee you that at some point during the course of this press conference, he will tell the world that America is the hottest country out there right now, which is his new buzz phrase to describe what he insists is an economy that is in recovery, even though there are still some very significant doubts about that, and millions of Americans who say they're not feeling it when they go and do the weekly shopping at their local supermarket. Yeah. But of course, once we get into questions and answers at this press conference, I think for many of the reporters in in the room, and for those of us watching, it is again going to be about Greenland. Is he going to do anything at this press conference to demonstrate that he is willing to take an off-ramp and de-escalate and de-conflict the situation with our own Prime Minister and those other European leaders now staring down the barrel of a threatened 10% tariff on exports to the United States from February the 1st? Or is he going to sound, as he did just a few hours ago when he returned to the White House from Florida, like a man who is as determined as ever to get his hands on Greenland?
Simon, that's what we need to hear. Stay there, please, don't go away. We rely on you. But we're going to hear now from a member of the Trump family who isn't a wholehearted supporter of her uncle, his niece, Mary Trump, the psychologist and founder of Mary Trump Media. Mary, thank you very much for joining us again. We've just been reflecting on a year where day after day after day, we are kind of obsessed with your uncle. He manages to suck the oxygen out of the news agenda for everybody else. It's a kind of disorientating, swirling, weird world to be living in. Does it all come from his own personality, his own background?
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, it's wonderful to be with you on this very dark first anniversary. Donald is exactly who he has always been. I think the problem we're facing now, and certainly have faced in the last year, is that thanks to some deeply misguided Americans who decided to put him back into power, a corrupt, illegitimate majority in the Supreme Court who gave him an imperial presidency, and a feckless, weak Republican Party that has completely ceded its constitutional duties, Donald is not bound by anything anymore. And he's also realizing unconsciously that all of the power, all of the money he's getting from corrupt corporations and from grifting off the American people isn't enough to fill the black hole within him. So now he's trying to do that by stealing other countries. It's quite alarming. And you're right, it has been an exhausting, demoralizing year.
You talk about his supine opponents domestically and the black hole inside him. The big question I think world leaders are now struggling with again is it better to try to ingratiate themselves and compromise with him, or to stand up to him? That's the huge question. Gavin Newsom, who seems to be emerging as the main opposition voice in your country, has just been in Davos accusing European leaders of being spineless and pathetic for not standing up to him. And he said he's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. You either mate with him or he eats you.
Well, that's evocative. I agree with Governor Newsom, but to be fair, I've been saying this for years. We have seen people capitulate. We have seen people try to make common cause with him time after time after time. The result is he gets more of what he wants. He feels more empowered to push the envelope further. He gets away with more and comes out the other end with his having accrued more power and the rest of us suffering for it. But nobody has ever stood up to him sufficiently.
But presumably, the more he gets, the more he wants. Somebody called him the hungry caterpillar as well. And so if he's successful with Greenland, potentially he goes for Canada as well, and so on and so on. There is no limit to this.
No, the reason he's going after Greenland again is because he got away with kidnapping a head of state from Venezuela. And what outcry has there been? What sanctions have there been? None. So again, we see what happens in those very limited instances when people do stand up to him. He can't handle it. We saw that in Detroit at a Ford plant when an auto worker called him a pedo protector. And the president of the United States gave him the middle finger and swore at him. The man has no impulse control. If there were sustained opposition against him, if European leaders stood up to a person and refused to capitulate, we would be seeing a very different situation.
That's a fascinating challenge. Let me ask you domestically. We've seen all these scenes of ICE people breaking into cars and horrible confrontations around America. Are we beginning to see a turning of the opinion polls about him? Are we beginning to see even MAGA people having second thoughts about what's going on?
Yeah, Donald is underwater in every category. I mean, I don't think we should kid ourselves that this is going to be over anytime soon. And I think his base is all in, but we are seeing deterioration in terms of independent voters, unaffiliated voters, and undecided voters. So I do believe that we're facing a turning point, especially since an airborne division from Alaska has been ordered to Minneapolis, which is unconstitutional. More and more people are opening their eyes. However, because the Republican Party is willing to allow Donald to continue unimpeded, the administration is going to become more and more driven to invade more American cities as if they were hostile foreign territory.
Yeah, and looking at the economics, the old phrase from the Clinton era, it's the economy is stupid. Food inflation is going up. Energy prices are going up still. You've got the midterms coming along. If things are looking difficult for him, do you think he would actually cancel those elections?
I think he'll try. I think part of what's happening in Minneapolis is a dry run to see if he can create a situation in which he can invoke the Insurrection Act or declare martial law. So Minnesota is an incredibly important test case for the Trump regime. And we just have to hope that there is a limit to this Supreme Court for the overreach of Donald and the Trump regime. So far, there hasn't been a line that he can't cross as far as the Supreme Court is concerned.
In terms of trampling across red lines, do you expect him to try to run for a third time?
I think it's more likely that he just won't leave. I think that's the likelier scenario.
Just won't leave the presidency. How could that be?
I think, well, that's what Maduro did, I believe. And I think that he's perfectly capable. The only reason that didn't happen in 2020 is because there were still a few people in his administration who weren't willing to go along with that. But we are in very different territory 4 years later.
So even without an electoral mandate, he would try to carry on the presidency. That would be a moment of kind of revolutionary challenge for the United States of America.
Well, I actually think we're going to see more revolutionary moments before then. And quite frankly, we need to find out what's going to happen this year with the midterms. So we need to be prepared for anything, because as we've seen, there are no lines Donald won't cross.
I wonder about American public opinion being the proper pushback. I saw a poll recently suggesting a very, very small number of Americans, I think about 4%, would favour a military incursion into Greenland. And presumably, surely at some point, those numbers start to tell on Donald Trump himself.
Perhaps. But again, we see with ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, an increasing majority of Americans are against those agencies and what they're doing. And the Trump regime, as Donald does always does, is doubling down on the tactics that Americans are increasingly against. So I don't necessarily think that anybody's opinion matters to him at this point, because he keeps getting away with it, which may prove to be more pivotal in how he proceeds than what people think of him.
Well, we've been saying on this programme this evening that he kind of sucks the oxygen out of everything, and he's the man with the global microphone, and he's about to stand in front of that microphone, I think, again, fairly soon. Don't go away, Mary, but I'm going to go talk to Simon Marks again. He's still with me, and we're still waiting for that White House press conference, aren't we, Simon?
We are indeed, Andrew, but just within the last minute or so, a couple of press aides at the White House have walked into the room and distributed documents to the reporters waiting for President Trump and the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. And I suspect that is the document proclaiming 365 wins in 365 days. The President of the United States very much in a mood to accentuate what he will argue at this press conference have been his achievements, even as, of course, massive questions hang over international affairs, including the future, critically, of the transatlantic relationship. Within the next few hours, Donald Trump will be departing the White House after this press conference is over and heading to Davos for what we know is going to be an absolutely critical meeting with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. He's bound to encounter other world leaders there as well. Today, we've heard the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney talking about a rupture in the relationship between Canada, its allies in Europe, and the United States. We've heard strong talk today from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, as well. So far, absolutely no indication from President Trump that he is willing to compromise or engage in any sort of dialogue that leads to an off-ramp from the confrontation that he now faces. And as Mary Trump was saying, Andrew, he feels absolutely emboldened after that military adventurism in Venezuela. And I think we're seeing that every single day here.
Simon, do you think there's any understanding at all inside the Trump White House of what effectively the end of the NATO and transatlantic treaty would be for America? Because they would lose, we've been discussing this on the programme this week, they'd lose huge bases in Germany and in Italy and Spain and this country as well. It would be a major pruning, as if you like, of America's ability to project itself as a global power. Does that weigh at all on Trump, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure that it weighs on Trump. There are certainly, despite the fact, of course, that we've seen in the last year an administration that has no restraining influences within it. Remember that Donald Trump was determined when he returned to office a year ago today to surround himself only with Make America Great Again loyalists. He thought that one of the mistakes of his first term was allowing people in who could talk him out of stuff. So there haven't been those restraining voices this time around, but certainly there are people, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who now is also Donald Trump's acting national security advisor, who will understand what is at stake in terms of setting fire to a transatlantic alliance that has kept the peace between, kept the peace in Europe, a transatlantic alliance between the United States and Europe, that the flaying of that alliance, the incineration of it, has massive implications. The problem is that Donald Trump is surrounded by lots of other people that don't buy it. And if you want to see, excruciating moments in Davos today, take a look at his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, one of the more garrulous, zealous America Firsters within the president's cabinet, as he was insisting that the United States needed Greenland for its national security, with Rachel Reeves, among others, sitting alongside him as part of a panel in Davos, all of them looking with disbelief, just slack-jawed, as Howard Lutnick doubled down on the president's threats to eviscerate that alliance.
And perhaps, most worryingly of all, not wanting to contradict even him. I'm thinking of Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who came over to Davos as well, and he was berating the Europeans for their sort of supine lack of backbone, lack of determination to stand up to Donald Trump. And he's saying you're getting exactly what you deserve because you haven't been prepared to stand up to this man.
Yeah, and I thought those were really interesting comments today by Gavin Newsom, Andrew, because he essentially was sending European leaders a warning, reminding them of how, from an American perspective, controversial, many of the things that Donald Trump is doing are with voters. I mean, we know that 75% of American voters say they don't want Greenland to be seized by force. We know that 58% of American voters are telling pollsters that they believe Donald Trump's first year in office, in his second term, has been a failure. And Gavin Newsom is essentially saying to the Prime Minister and other European leaders, you've got to be very careful here, because ultimately you are going to be judged on the extent to which you continue to seek to bend over backwards and compromise with a president of the United States who, for at least half the country, is deeply, viscerally opposed. There's been fresh data out showing how determined Democrats are to get out and vote for their party in the midterm elections in November. if they take place in a free, fair and unmolested fashion.
If. And Simon, we're all trying to gauge whether there are splits or divisions at all over this titanic battle over the future of NATO within the White House. We've had the Speaker, Mike Johnson, in the House of Commons today addressing parliamentarians here, and he was adopting a much more emollient tone, a calm down, don't get too excited, don't think about tariffs kind of tone. Does that reflect your understanding of senior Republicans outside the Trump inner circle?
Yeah, I mean, I see that the American ambassador to the UK, Warren Stevens, has put out a very similar message within the last couple of hours over X, saying that he agrees with Mike Johnson. And, there has to be a way of, continuing to forge a successful transatlantic relationship. Certainly on Capitol Hill, there has been a belated hardening of attitudes, I think it's fair to say. We saw over the weekend Congressman Mike McCall, an influential foreign policy voice within the Republican Party, taking to television and I think directing a message at Donald Trump in part to warn that he was risking war with NATO, especially were he to pursue a military strategy towards Greenland. But at the end of the day, Mike Johnson is second in line for the presidency behind J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
And he is a man who is regularly surprised by the president's statements, has the rug pulled out from beneath him by the president. This is a one-man show here, as we are about to see over the course of the next few minutes at the White House.
Absolutely fantastic, Simon. Thank you very, very much. And Donald Trump's niece, Mary Trump, is still on the line. Mary, I don't know if you could hear that from Simon there, but I come back to where we started, in a sense, which is right across Europe, leaders are asking themselves, what is the best way to deal with this man? How aggressive can I be? How placatory can I be? What does he really respect? I come from a small country, they might say, so how can I make him respect me? What would be your advice?
Yes, and it was a great summary. I think what the EU and other countries need to understand is that there's strength in numbers. They all have to take the same position. We've seen in this country what happens when media corporations, universities, white shoe law firms do not band together. Some capitulate, which essentially puts the others in a very difficult position, increases the size of the target on their backs, makes them entities that Donald is more likely to go after. So they need to stand together. I think we often have a tendency with Donald to talk about what he's doing as if it were in the context of the normal. What he is doing is putting at risk the post-World War II liberal democratic order.
Absolutely.
And we are on the precipice of losing what has been one of the most effective organizations ever created in NATO. And think about how mind-boggling this is. There is a possibility that NATO is going to have to fight against what has been, up until very recently, one of its most dedicated, loyal members, the United States of America, all because the president of the United States is, colloquially speaking, out of his mind.
Colloquially speaking, and perhaps literally. Mary Trump, thank you very, very much indeed for talking to me tonight. It's an ominous evening, but thanks for that. I should remind listeners that we are waiting for a President Trump press conference from the White House, and we will bring it to you live as soon as we can, so do stay with us. My deputy political editor, Aggie Shornbrae, is with me now. Donald Trump has been ripping up the domestic playbook here for a long time. It's a very, very important couple of days, this, because of the level of the crisis. Keir Starmer, I thought, spoke very calmly. Let's all be calm. We've had Speaker Mike Johnson from the States over saying the same thing. And as Simon was saying, the American ambassador in London, Warren Stevens, again, keep calm. Don't get overexcited at the moment. What is the mood inside the Labour Party and among ministers?
It's a really good question. I think people don't quite know what is going on. And of course, they do not know what is going to happen next. They literally at the moment are checking their phones, as we all are in the mornings when they wake up and seeing what Donald Trump has posted on social media this time. And I think there is genuine worry and concern. I think they don't know what the correct approach is at the moment, but they basically think what Keir Starmer is doing at the moment seems to be working in a way. And I think I was having a conversation with the minister today, actually, who basically said, look, hindsight is 2020. We do not know how this is going to pan out. We do not know if the softly diplomacy will work, but that seems to be the best approach at the moment.
So there's a very, very interesting question about Keir Starmer here, because he almost embarrassed himself in his sort of obsequious behaviour to Donald Trump in the national interest. He thought, I'm not interested in my own ego. I'm prepared to do things that make me look perhaps a little bit foolish in the interest of keeping those tariffs down. And for a while, it seemed to be working. You thought, good for him. Go him. But now, since this latest Greenland threat of the tariffs are back up again, he appears to have got, long-term, absolutely nothing at all.
I think that is the real worry. But when I spoke to other people about that today, they basically said, I'm speaking about Labour MPs, some people in government too, what choice does Keir Starmer have? We are pretty isolated in a way.
We can't puff out our chest and say we'll have big tariffs against you. We're too small for that.
As one Labour MP said to me, look, if we start throwing rocks at America, they will throw bigger rocks at us. And I think that is
it's a good way of putting it.
The real
Very good
concern.
Way of putting it.
And another Labour MP, who I think it's worth saying is no fan of Donald Trump, was basically saying, sometimes he can act like a child, a toddler, and the way to deal with a toddler is not to kind of put them on the naughty step, because that might exacerbate their behaviour. It's to kind of explain to them what they've done wrong, but keep them very much in the fold, and almost, and this is their word, to patronise them. But I think
I'm glad it's not my job to tell Donald Trump where he's gone wrong and patronise him a little bit. It sounds terribly scary.
But there is good news for Keir Starmer, and that is even amongst the proper rebels in the Labour Party who were thinking that, there was no way he would last the year, they're actually saying, well, look, it would look extremely navel-gazing if we were to think about replacing him now. So actually, for him, I think this is probably good for the moment in that very, very specific sense.
In a sense, the violence of the storm that Donald Trump has summoned up is the case for not taking the person at the steering wheel away from it right now.
I think that's how some people feel it. And I don't think many people in the Labour Party would say that Keir Starmer is not good at dealing with foreign affairs. They think this is really his strong point.
Right. Thank you very much for now, Aggie. I'm sure we'll be talking again shortly. Now, I started the show by saying that we're obsessed by Donald Trump because he's always online, he's always in front of a microphone, except when you really need him, except when you're waiting for him. Simon, we are still waiting for that press conference. Any further hints or glints from the room itself?
Well, I can tell you that one of the news channels here, CNN, has gone to a commercial break, so they've clearly decided it was safe to do that. I don't think we've yet had the 2-minute warning in the room. I can tell you that the White House's own social media channel has still not started transmitting live pictures from within the briefing room, although they tend to start literally the second the president walks into the podium, walks up to the podium. Look, I think we are clearly delayed here, as invariably events at the White House are. Donald Trump's certainly not unique in that. Other presidents have been even worse, actually, in terms of their punctuality. But he's also, I think, eager to build an audience for this. Remember, this is the great showman of American politics, whatever you think of his ideology and his philosophy. And he knows that people are tuning in. He's the ringmaster. They're going online, they're flooding in to wait to see what he has to say. And what he has to say today has tremendous moment, both here in the United States and internationally. Because remember, his own approval rating here in America is underwater. It's down to 38% in most polls. Voters say they simply don't believe him when he says that he's turned the economy around, that the stock market is booming, that billions of dollars are being brought in tariffs. By the way, Andrew, he had one very lucky development here today, just a couple of hours ago. We thought that today might be the day when the US Supreme Court issued their finding, their opinion on his tariffs, the reciprocal, the Liberation Day tariffs, the threat to put tariffs against the UK and its NATO allies on February the 1st. And the Supreme Court issued 3 rulings today, and none of them related to tariffs. And the White House knows there's a real possibility that when the 9 justices of the Supreme Court publish that opinion, it is going to strike down Donald Trump's tariffs because he used emergency laws to put those tariffs into place. He did an end run around Congress. So it may well have been that they were waiting to see if the Supreme Court was going to publish that judgment today. It didn't come out. We now think we won't. The next opportunity to see it, we think here, is February the 20th. So that means the way is clear for those 10% duties against the UK and other countries to come into force on February the 1st. And it may be that he's got a different story to tell now than what would have been today. That would be a reaction to a possibly huge loss.
That would have been a heck of a moment. Simon, you hang around at the back of a Donald Trump press conference, and before he gets going, you learn all sorts of interesting things. For now, thank you very much indeed. And we're going to bring you that press conference as soon as we possibly can. But first, the time is 6:30, and here is Amelia Cox with your news headlines.
MI5 says it can't eliminate every potential risk linked to a new Chinese super embassy in central London, but it does all.
With Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:32. As we predicted last night, the government has launched a consultation into banning social media for under 16s, as Australia does now. There is a huge groundswell of support for this, I think, in the Labour Party, across the House of Commons and among voters. But there's also a case for caution. So let's hear both sides of the argument now. First, Justine Roberts, the founder and chief executive of Mumsnet. Justine, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Your listeners, your users, the people you interact with, is there an overwhelming sense that the time has come for a complete ban?
Yes, we polled the parents on Mumsnet, our 8 million users, and 83% of them support a ban on social media for under 16. So it's pretty clear. It's not surprising why. 92% are concerned about the effect of social media on their children's mental health and well-being. That's more than 9 out of 10 parents. So I think parents are battling every day with trying to restrict phone use, trying to restrict the addiction that they see that their kids are battling with themselves. So it's making parenting and everyday life a real challenge.
This may be the single most important domestic political argument in the country at the moment, I think. Is it possible, from the reactions you've got, to know what people are particularly worried about? Is it their children's concentration? Is it pornography? Is it political extremism? What is the thing that really gets people going most?
I think it's the mental health epidemic that's happening in our country at the moment amongst young people, which we've done some other work on. And I think it is the addictive, by design nature of these devices, and particularly social media, that is causing this endless battle in family life. So obviously there are other concerns around the nature of the content, but it's actually the apps themselves are causing kids. It's
been described as a giant, uncontrolled, unregulated experiment on growing brains. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think that's what parents feel. I think my generation of parents always knew we were a bit of a guinea pig generation because we'd not grown up with this technology ourselves. And we can all, as adults, see how compelling it is and how you want to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. So I think, it is an issue. And I think the argument that it won't be perfect to ban, I think we'd agree with that it wouldn't be perfect. But since when has public policy had to be perfect? We don't.
Better than where we are now. Better than where we are now, you'd say. Justine, I'm not just saying this because you've joined us this evening, but we all know that Mumsnet is a very important political organisation in terms of getting the attention of ministers, not just when you're asking them about their favourite biscuits. So I'm wondering whether you have had direct interactions with the government, with Keir Starmer Number 10 or the Education Secretary, anybody else about this?
We've definitely spoken to a number of very senior people and departments about this and about the forthcoming and how they've been thinking about it. We've been speaking to Josh McAllister, who brought in a bill around this last year. But crucially, 58% of our users say they would be more likely to vote for a political party that pledged to implement a ban. And that, I suspect, has not gone unnoticed.
Not gone unnoticed. And, of course, the Conservatives have already more or less said they would do that thing.
They have.
We had the MP who got 60 of his colleagues to write in about this on the show yesterday, Fred Thomas, and he was clearly a little bit worried that a consultation, which is what Number 10 are announcing, is just another way of putting off a decision for another few weeks or months. How concerned are you that this has just been kicked into the long grass?
I think this issue is not a simple one. There are, a lot of arguments on either side. I don't think it's a bad idea to hear the arguments. What worries me and what worries our users is that this government has a greater concern for the interests of big tech than it does for children's well-being. And I think this is an opportunity to prove otherwise. I think it would be politically popular if they did something and be seen to stand up to big tech and to bring in regulation against them. That may mean over time that it puts the onus on big tech to do something. But in the meantime, we've got to protect our kids.
I absolutely agree. In the end, it's about political courage. Justine Roberts, thank you very much indeed for talking to me tonight. And Justine was saying there, we have to hear both sides of the argument, which is a very good thing for her to say, because we're now going to talk to Steve Chalk, the founder of the Oasis Academy Trust, which represents 54 academy schools. And he has some concerns himself, and he's with me now. Steve, thank you very much for joining me. What is the case against the government going straight ahead and announcing next week or the week after a complete ban?
I think the case against it is exactly what Justine said. I don't disagree with Justine at all, but you need a thoroughgoing consultation, a real consultation that listens to all of the facts rather than to one group. Now, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. I realise our children have had questions about this as our grandchildren have grown, and there are 33,000 children in our schools. I'm really well aware of all the dangers, and we have to stand up to big tech. We've got to do that. But we've got to be wise enough to make sure that we don't make the wrong move, which opens up the dark web. As we lock out big tech, we open up the dark web. When I was growing up, Andrew, my mother was sure that rock music would drive me insane.
Did it?
Then it didn't. I love it. When the electric guitar and the drums and their druid beat, etc., etc. There are dangers all around us, but I don't agree with the point that every parent is struggling with this, actually. I think many parents are struggling with it, but I think parents who've got the time, and there's some parents that don't have the time, to spend with their children. I watch them navigating all of this because crossing the road is a danger. Because going for a swim is a danger. We have to build in the right regulation. And if a ban is the right way forward, let's create that ban. But if it opens up the dark web, if it stops kids having a phone where they can cry for help when they're being abused at home, let's just be careful about what we're doing as we go.
Steve, really interesting. You've mentioned the dark web a couple of times. Now, there is a ban already in place in Australia. And there is some evidence, I think, that some children are managing to move from the kind of well-known social media sites, Instagram and TikTok and the rest of it, onto very, very grimmer parts of the internet. They're using VPNs and so forth to get round the ban. And presumably the fear would be that a complete ban would just drive more people in that direction.
Yes, absolutely. A role that I played, changing the metaphor again, a role that I played for 8 years, I was the UN Special Advisor on community action against human trafficking. The traffickers are always a step ahead. The criminals are always a step ahead. So what we have to be, Andrew, is smart, and we all know that. So if it's a ban, let's make sure it's the right kind of ban with the right kind of policy and the right kind of legislation. So all I'm saying is let's pause. I don't mean pause as in just push it down the river.
No, but think.
I mean, let's
think.
really think about what we're doing.
When we all rush for a piece of legislation, which we all agree is obviously necessary, very often later on it proves to be the wrong piece of legislation or wrongly done. So, Steve Chalk, thank you very much indeed for that warning. And we are still waiting for President Trump and his press conference in the White House. Simon Marks is still on the line. Simon, a can of Coke is on the podium apparently. There's a little can of Coke there. Could the man be following close behind?
Yes, it was placed on the podium a short while ago by a man in uniform. So that gives you an indication that President Trump is still not far away from making this press conference. I can tell you, Andrew, that over the course of the last couple of hours, if anything, his White House has doubled down on the criticism of the UK over the Chagos Islands transfer to Mauritius. I see that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has given an interview to a web streaming program hosted by the president's on-again, off-again political advisor, Steve Bannon, in which he ties again Greenland to the issue of the Chagos Islands. He says the president just believes that the US needs Greenland because no one will make a move on it then. And then he goes on to say, we share a military facility on an island called Diego Garcia, which of course is in the Chagos Islands. And the UK is giving that island to Mauritius. And guess who is behind Mauritius? Scott Bessent asks rhetorically, then answers his own question. He says, the Chinese. So that certainly gives you an indication that at least one of President Trump's top lieutenants is circling the wagons regarding that overnight criticism of the UK. And the other development is that President Trump on social media himself has approvingly reposted an assertion by another right-wing presence on Truth Social, who is arguing that the country needs to realize that the enemy is within. China and Russia are the boogeymen when the real threat is the United Nations, NATO, and then the poster goes on to imply Muslims in the United States. So astonishing. That suggests we're still doubling down here.
It certainly does. All right, for now, Simon, thank you very, very much indeed, because all eyes remain on the White House. Now, President Trump is able to get the world's attention even when he's not there. But we're going to bring you that press conference as soon as the man himself comes out. Time now, 6:43.
Coming Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:45. We will be hearing from the White House shortly, I hope, either with myself or Ian Dale. Either way, stay with LBC. But for now, we have heard endlessly over the past few weeks about the Chinese proposed mega embassy in London. It finally got the go-ahead this morning. Here is the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, addressing protesters outside the site just opposite the Tower of London.
I grew up under a dictatorship. I know what it is like to live under a government that you are terrified of. I know what it is like to be afraid of what will happen to you if you speak out, for journalists to be murdered, for people to be hounded out of the country. I understand, and that is why I know it is wrong for this super embassy to be built here on this site.
Well, I don't like the smell of the decision either. But of course, there is a case for it. So let's hear the other side of the story now with the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis. Dan, we've heard a lot about these very, very sensitive cables, only about 1.5 meters away from the proposed site and the underground rooms there. Why is that not a real concern?
Well, I think it's useful to look at the letter that's been sent today by the Director General of MI5 and GCHQ, who make the point that there are clear security advantages as a consequence of this proposal. It's important to understand.
What are they?
Well, the diplomatic estate currently consists of 7 sites. So China have 7 diplomatic sites across London. This proposal will mean that it will be a single site. So clearly there are national security advantages as a consequence of that consolidation.
It's a single site that rests right beside some of the most sensitive cables in terms of our financial transactions and what we do as a country, absolutely essential to the security of the City of London. Why is that not a problem?
We've got some of the best security services in the world. They have 100 years of experience of dealing with foreign embassies. And I am confident that with the right mitigations in place, and mindful of the point about consolidation, that this is the right decision in terms of our national security.
So I've heard this word mitigation a lot. What does it actually mean? Does it mean screening the cables with some kind of new technology? Does it mean moving the cable somewhere else? What does it mean?
It's a good question, Andrew, but I think you'll understand as the Security Minister why I'm not going to get to the precise details of what we're going to do with the cables. But I can give you an assurance that with the right mitigations, then we can mitigate some of the risks that we might face. But let's be clear about the fact we face those risks at the moment through the 7 sites that they currently have.
I'm going to press you very gently one more time. If it was the right thing to do, would you move the cables?
We can mitigate the risk from the cables, and I was very clear in the Commons about that today. And the Intelligence and Security Committee, who have an important role in Parliament, I think it's worth looking at the conclusions that they've drawn, and they accept that with the right mitigations in place, then the security risk can be managed. But let's not pretend that we don't have to manage security risks at the moment.
Of course.
We do, and that's why the consolidation of the existing state will deliver security advantages.
We know that China is very aggressively spying on us at the moment, not least in Parliament. Has any of that made the government think at any point twice about this, or is it always a done deal because China's such a big, important
It was never
player?
a done deal. There's been a very clear quasi-judicial process. The government has put in place a whole range of countermeasures to counter the risk that we face from a number of different threats. I've made numerous announcements to Parliament about what we're doing, but this is in our national security interest.
Dan, I was going to ask you about the check of silence, but we are now going live to the White House where Donald Trump has finally started his news briefing. Let's listen in.
All page after page after page, individual things. I could stand here and read it for a week and we wouldn't be finished. But we've done more than any other administration has done by far in terms of military, in terms of ending wars, in terms of completing wars. Nobody's really seen very much like it. I think it's appropriate that because Minnesota is so much in the fray, and I say to my people all the time, and they're so busy doing other things, they don't say it like they should. They're apprehending murderers and drug dealers and a lot of bad people. And these are just some of the more recent ones that we have. And I can show you some of the people, vicious, many of them murderers. These are all out of Minnesota, just Minnesota. I say, why don't you talk about that more? Because people don't know. Do you want to live with these people? International murder. These are people that are living, they're apprehended and either put in jails in their country from where they came, and the countries respect us, and so they actually put them there. In the old days, they didn't respect our country. Biden wouldn't do this because he let them all in. You know, if you didn't have open border policies of Biden, none of this, all of the things that all of the time that we spend talking about Minnesota and everything else, most of them are coming from out of the country. And it's been caused by a previous administration. Look at this, one after one. Boy, these are rough killers. They're mentally insane. They're killers, but they're insane. These are just in Minnesota. California, it's worse. In other states, it's worse. No, Minnesota, the crime is incredible. The financial crimes are incredible. And the problem is because of the agitators and insurrectionists, whatever you want, troublemakers, but they're paid agitators and insurrectionists. Nobody talks about the fact that $19 billion at a minimum is missing in Minnesota, given to a large degree by Somalians. They've taken it. Somalians, can you imagine? And they don't do it. A lot of very low IQ people, they don't do it. Other people work it out, and they get them money, and they go out and buy Mercedes-Benzes, and they come from here, they have no money. They never had money. They never had a life. They never had a government. They never had a country, because there's basically no country. Somalia is not even a country. They don't have anything that resembles a country. And if it is a country, it's considered just about the worst in the world. They come here and they become rich and they don't have a job. I was told that Ilhan Omar is worth $30 million. She never had a job. She's a crooked congressman. So here is another one. And I have, oh, by the way, we just took out, these are all what ICE is doing. And it's a dangerous job. These are rough people. Weapons. This one here is very bad. I'm going through this because I think we have plenty of time. I'm going to beautiful place in Switzerland where we'll be, I'm sure I'm very happily awaited for. In Switzerland, they don't know about this. They don't have this problem. They have other problems, but they don't have this problem. Look, killed somebody. Look, and these are rough people. These are not. This was all allowed into our country through, but to me, having...
This is sounding very, very surreal and very domestic to me. I'm sorry to interrupt President Trump, but I think it's time to do that and talk indeed to Simon Marks, who's, I think, probably been viewing with this with the same quantity of bewilderment as old Andrew Marr.
Well, Andrew, he did slightly telegraph that this was on his mind earlier today. He's put out so many postings over his Truth social media platform today, but one of them zeroed in on what appears to be his anger with his own Department of Homeland Security for not making it clear to Americans sufficiently, he believes, that what his thuggish, masked ICE and Border Patrol agents are doing in Minneapolis, he claims are sweeping cold-hearted criminals off the streets in substantial numbers. So what he's doing there is holding up mugshots of people that he claims ICE have apprehended in Minneapolis, and those mugshots are all emblazoned with the slogan, "the worst of the worst." And he's basically, at least at the opening of this press conference, acting as his own government spokesman, because he's clearly not very happy with the job that the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, has been doing in trying to persuade Americans that the brutal scenes that we've witnessed on the streets of Minneapolis, including the killing of 37-year-old Renee Good at the hands of a trigger-happy ICE agent a couple of weeks ago, he says, he's arguing, it's all worth it because he's getting convicted criminals, murderers, and you heard him there claiming that these people are rapists off the streets. We've also heard another extraordinary attack on the Somali community in Minnesota and Minneapolis, St. Paul particularly, who are still the target of his ire. Somalia is not even a country, he said, falsely of course, and if it is, he went on to say, it's the worst in the world. So all of this, and he's still brandishing more and more of those pictures of people that have been apprehended in Minneapolis, is a bid to try and boost support, which has been flagging for ICE operations in Minneapolis and all over the rest of the country.
I guess, Simon, what slightly surprised me was that this, as we were saying earlier on, is a world-reshaping man. I mean, he's got huge global importance. And so far, he's not mentioned Greenland, he's not mentioned Europe, he's not mentioned any of the big global international issues that confront him. It's all domestic. Is this because you think his opinion polls are starting to worry him, as you were suggesting earlier?
Well, I think definitely, yes. I think definitely he wants to get the message across that, particularly as far as his battle against illegal immigration is concerned, he wants to tell his core supporters, the Make America Great Again faithful, that he is delivering on the mandate that he says they provided him with in November of 2024. I also suspect that this is not a president who is in a particular hurry this afternoon, so we're going to get to Greenland and all of the other issues once he finishes these opening remarks. However, it's exactly 1 year since he returned to the Oval Office, and he certainly at the beginning of this press conference does not appear to be in particularly celebratory mood. It's a pretty dour and grim presentation that continues to take place. He's holding up more photographs of the worst even as we continue to speak.
He sounds like he is in a very dark place, dark mood at the moment, and therefore Europeans who are hoping, in the word of that acronym TACO, Trump always chickens out, on Greenland and on the tariff confrontation with the EU, they may be disappointed.
They may well be disappointed. I mean, they certainly will have been disappointed from everything we've seen on the president's social media feed over the course of the last few hours. He did sort of briefly, sardonically joke there and say that I'm sure they're all very happy to be waiting for me in Switzerland. So he's aware that there are difficult conversations that lie ahead with Ursula von der Leyen and others, and he'll undoubtedly be aware of the things that Emmanuel Macron and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney have been saying in Davos over the course of the last few hours. We will all, of course, be looking to see during the course of this press conference, is there any sign of de-escalation, any sign of an off-ramp, or is he just going absolutely to double down? He's certainly doubling down now about events on the streets of Minneapolis domestically. Let's see where he goes internationally as this press conference continues.
Simon Marks, the hardest working man in broadcast journalism. Thank you for now, very much indeed. Ian Dale is going to be with you in a few moments to give his analysis, and I will be back tomorrow. But first, let's cross back to the White House, where President Trump, surprise, surprise, is still speaking.
I could go 30 times what I'm showing you now. Murderers, people that murdered. So what ICE does, and Border Patrol is incredible too. I mean, Paul Perez and that group is incredible. Mostly Hispanic, by the way. They're like 60% Hispanic. You know, they talk about Hispanic. They're mostly Hispanic, right? And they're unbelievable people. And then they say, oh, we discriminate against. I love Hispanic. They are unbelievable. Entrepreneurial. They have everything. I did great. I did the highest